Operation Widowmaker, subtitle. He died in exile, but his secrets didn't. Genre, political thriller, conspiracy, international espionage. Tagline, when the world's most feared tyrant dies in a foreign hospital, the real war begins. Operation Widowmaker, he died in exile. But what he left behind could destroy nations. Part 1, The Last Breath, the dictator dies. The Secrets Don't, Chapter 1, The Silent Room. Geneva, Switzerland, 03:41 a.m. The machines had gone quiet hours ago. No beeping, no monitors blinking. Only the soft click of a single overhead light, flickering above the man who was no longer alive. Room 418 of Les Shen Clinic sat at the far end of the East Wing. It was private, discreet, tucked behind a false wall that didn't appear on blueprints. The kind of room you booked when you didn't want to exist. Koma Jafari, President for Life of Rukasa, architect of 4 genocides, self-anointed son of the sun, was dead. He had arrived under the name Yakub Femi, age 74, admitted for respiratory complications due to a rare autoimmune collapse. The intake form listed him as a retired diplomat. No bodyguards, no official entourage, no press. Only one person on staff had been permitted into the room. Nurse Amira Halberd stood over him now, arms folded, gloved fingers clenched around a clipboard that no longer mattered. The man in the bed had once ruled a nation with fire. He had burned villages with words, signed death warrants over morning tea. Yet here he lay, withered, sunken, nothing left but the echo of violence in his skin. She watched his chest, just in case. No movement, no trick of light or breath. He was gone. The clock on the wall read 3:41 a.m. The world outside didn't know it yet, but everything had already changed. Amira exhaled and turned to the corner of the room. The man's belongings were packed in a single leather duffel. It sat under the window, zipped shut, nondescript except for a metal clasp engraved with old military script. She hadn't touched it. She had no intention to. But something about the silence pressed in, like a presence watching from just beyond the curtain. She opened the file again. Yakub Femi had no insurance on record. Payment had arrived via crypto wire from an unlisted source. Emergency passport was issued by a defunct diplomatic post in Burkina Faso. The photograph didn't match the man's face exactly, but close enough to pass. She didn't know who he was, not yet, but something in her bones did. This was no ordinary death. She moved to the bedside and pulled the sheet up over the man's face. She had seen many pass, quietly, violently, screaming into the dark, but this was the only one that felt like it might echo. Outside, thunder cracked low over Lake Geneva. The hospital lights dimmed, then snapped back with a shudder. 2 floors below, a man in a gray wool coat watched the hallway camera feed freeze, glitch, then resume. He said nothing. He was not part of the hospital staff. His credentials said otherwise. The moment the monitors went dark, he moved, entering the staff control room without a sound. He was inside less than 30 seconds. By the time the power resumed, the backup system had already been rerouted. 1 file deleted, 1 access point unlogged. The internal records would later show that room 418 had been closed due to electrical failure. There would be no mention of who had died, no patient under the name Jafari, no birth date, no body. Only Amira Halberd would remember the man in the bed, and soon they would come for her too. She wheeled the body into the restricted corridor alone. It was standard protocol for classified guests. He would bypass the public morgue. Swiss discretion demanded it. She didn't notice the small tear in the vinyl lining of the stretcher. Didn't see the blinking green light buried in the lining of the duffel bag, smaller than a fingernail, already transmitting. The body would not make it to the freezer. It would vanish between hallways, offloaded by 2 men in maintenance uniforms who were never employed at Les Shen. The footage of their movements would be wiped within the hour. Amira returned to her shift, dazed. Her supervisor waved her off, nodded toward the nurse's locker with a tired smile. "Go rest. You've been on for 18 hours. She nodded absently. She didn't remember grabbing the bag. Only that she saw it in the corner as she left the room. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe something darker. But the bag came with her. She dropped it in the passenger seat of her old Renault. Didn't think twice. By the time she pulled into her apartment garage an hour later, the storm had settled over Geneva in full. She climbed the stairs slowly, her key fumbling in the lock. The elevator had been broken for 2 weeks. Not that she minded. Sleep-deprived movement was the only thing that kept her upright. The bag sat at the foot of her bed, still unopened, still humming, though she didn't know it yet. Inside the bag was a single USB drive, disguised as a blood glucose reader. It contained 317 encrypted files, 43 video recordings, 17 signed documents naming active operatives in European parliaments, a letter addressed to someone codenamed Widowmaker, and a digital trigger set to activate if the wrong person tried to open it. At precisely 4:15 a.m., 48 miles away in a reinforced underground chamber beneath Zurich, A silent alert appeared on a black screen. Alpha Black file access attempt detected. Operation Widowmaker reactivated. An old man in a tailored suit placed his coffee down slowly. They found the bag, he muttered. He pressed a button on his desk. Wake the field units. Find the nurse. Burn the footage. And make sure whoever took the body never speaks again. A pause. And for God's sake, verify Jafari is actually dead. Chapter 2. False Identity. Geneva, Switzerland, 08:27 a.m. The rain hadn't stopped. It bled down the glass windows of Amira Halberd's apartment like a slow confession, gray light tracing every drop as if searching for something hidden behind the silence. She stood barefoot in the kitchenette, cradling a mug of bitter instant coffee, staring at the black duffel bag by the door. She hadn't slept. The man, the patient, had died quietly, but everything else screamed. The bag was wrong. That was the problem. It didn't feel like luggage. It felt like protocol. Military protocol. Amira had been trained to spot discrepancies. Even in peace, war leaves residue. A nurse in Geneva might look like a civilian, but she remembered the screams in Asmara, the clinics overrun with smoke and blood. The war had never really left her. It just changed languages. She sipped the coffee, cold already, and stepped toward the bag. A slow breath, one hand on the zipper. A pull! Inside, neatly packed, were a pressed navy suit, 2 sealed syringes marked in French, a black notebook with no writing, and a small hard-shelled case the size of a lunchbox. At first glance, the case looked medical. It wasn't. She opened it slowly. The foam lining cradled a compact flash drive built into a casing that resembled a diabetic glucose meter. Clever. Innocuous. But it had no test strip port, no display, just a single port recessed and unlabeled. A serial number had been scratched off. Beneath the drive was a keycard, red, embossed with an insignia she didn't recognize. 2 concentric rings around a downward-pointing dagger. No language, just geometry and threat. She set the case aside and reached for the file folder she'd tucked under her coat hours ago. Yakub Femi. Admitted 2 weeks ago under palliative authorization. No family listed. Arrived with a private note from a retired WHO doctor granting emergency clearance. But the passport photocopy was the first red flag. The date of birth, July 11th, 1948. The patient, the man, had scars that would have been decades old by then. Amateur field sutures, burns layered with keloid ridges. Not the kind of damage you earn in diplomatic service. More like the aftermath of war. Second red flag, his listed weight was off by at least 15 kilograms. And the third, his face. The photo showed a rounded man with loose cheeks and laughing eyes. The body that lay still in room 418 had sunken eyes, a strong jawline, and the tight, weathered expression of a man who'd never laughed freely. Amira dropped the passport onto the counter. The man who died was not Yakub Femi. She turned to the notebook again. It looked blank. No markings on the cover. No embossed logo, no barcode. She opened to the first page and ran her finger across the paper. Nothing. But the second page felt thicker. She held it against the light. Something was there. Words written in invisible ink began to emerge, bare outlines like frost blooming on glass. She moved the notebook closer to the stovetop near the warmth, just enough heat to coax out what had been hidden. 3 lines appeared. He ruled by silence. He dies with noise. If you read this, the keys are loose. You must decide whether to lock the door or open it. Below, in faint print, Widowmaker. Her skin prickled. That word again. It wasn't the first time she'd heard it. 4 years ago, during a medical conference in Berlin, a South Sudanese official collapsed during a panel. Amira had helped resuscitate him. In his final breath, he whispered something barely coherent. She had always dismissed it as shock, a hallucination. But now she remembered. He said, "They never ended Widowmaker. They just buried it in the wrong hands." Her hands trembled. She dropped the notebook and stepped back from the counter. For the first time in hours, she realized her apartment was too quiet. No cars outside. No elevator groan from the hallway. Even the radiator had stopped its usual humming rattle. She moved to the window and parted the curtain an inch. A black sedan sat across the street. No plates. Parked 2 meters too close to the hydrant. Inside, 2 men. Unmoving. Heads low. They weren't neighbors. Her breath caught. She moved quickly, grabbed the flash drive, slid it into her coat pocket, shoved the rest of the contents back into the duffel and zipped it closed. The bag was heavy. Too heavy for a civilian carry-on. Something metallic clinked beneath the foam lining. She left it for now. She stuffed the notebook in the back of a drawer and locked it. Then she moved to the door and listened. Nothing. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Outside, down the hall. She didn't wait. Through the fire escape, down the side ladder, out the alley. Rain soaked her sleeves. Her flats slipped on the pavement. She didn't stop. Behind her, the apartment lights flickered once, then died. An hour later, the men entered the apartment. They moved with surgical precision. They didn't touch anything. One scanned with a thermal wand. The other lifted fingerprints with adhesive mesh. A third joined them late, suit and gloves, no rank. He opened the duffel, searched beneath the foam. Found the lining torn. "She's already seen it," he said flatly. "Should we recover?" He shook his head. "No. If she's opened it, Widowmaker will already be awake." He turned to the window, watching the city rise under cloud and steam. Find her before they do. Chapter 3. The Bagles, Shen's Clinic, Geneva, 05:57 a.m. The handover was chaos. Day shift had arrived late. Night shift was half asleep. A cardiac alarm had gone off 2 floors down just as the morgue transporter called in sick. There was no protocol for this kind of patient because there was no patient. At least not officially. Amira Halbert stood at the nurse's station, her scrubs damp with sweat, hands trembling just slightly from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Her eyes kept drifting to the clipboard. Room 418, marked discharged, expired, but no name next to the body removal field. Just a long, deliberate black line. No attending physician had signed off. No post-mortem note, no time of death, and yet the body was gone. Not wheeled out through the standard corridor. Not registered in the internal logs. She had walked back past room 418 10 minutes ago and found the bed stripped, the monitors powered down, and the room disinfected. Too fast, too thorough. Someone had erased him. Now she stood by the locker, trying to remember how the bag ended up in her possession. The black duffel with reinforced stitching and a steel zipper. It wasn't hers. It hadn't been tagged for personal effects, but in the confusion of shift change, someone had tossed it onto the outgoing equipment cart, alongside her tote bag, her thermos, her folded uniform jacket. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was muscle memory. But somehow, when she stepped out the side exit to the staff garage, it was in her hand. She hadn't questioned it until the car door shut behind her and the bag dropped onto the passenger seat with a dull thud. Too heavy. Too structured. She knew right away it didn't belong to her. But by then, she'd already passed the second security gate. And she wasn't going back. Amira's apartment, Geneva, 06:41 a.m. The rain began again just as she turned the key in the lock. Fine, cold, whispering rain. The kind that coated the skin without mercy. She stepped inside and tossed the bag to the floor, kicking off her shoes with a groan. Her body ached in strange places. Her back throbbed from the night shift. Her mind hadn't stopped spinning since the man's death. The bag sat like a monolith beside the doorway, watching her, daring her. She ignored it. Showered, changed, ate 2 spoonfuls of cereal before the taste made her gag. Poured hot water over a tea bag and then forgot it for 2 hours. The bag remained unopened. She napped in fits. 30 minutes of restless sleep on the couch, haunted by dreams that didn't have shape. Only dread. She saw machines bleeding smoke, corridors without walls, voices that whispered a name she didn't recognize but somehow feared. Widowmaker. The word came again and again. She jolted awake. The sun was barely risen. The clock said 08:03. She rose slowly, rubbed the sleep from her neck, and turned to the bag. Still unopened. Still waiting. She stepped toward it. Her fingers brushed the zipper and froze. Not yet. She needed time. A full breath. A quiet head. She moved instead to the small white desk in the corner, opened her laptop, and keyed into the hospital records. Room 418 didn't exist anymore. The patient log had been wiped clean. Yakub Femi no longer appeared in the hospital system. The digital timestamp on his admission had been overwritten. Even the nurse's rotation schedule, her own name, was missing from the last 12 hours. She blinked. No record of her being on shift. No record of him dying. No record of him ever living. She reached for the bag again, then stopped herself. Not yet. She paced the apartment, each step growing more agitated. She dialed the clinic twice. No answer. She texted another nurse. "Did you handle 418 postmortem?" But the message didn't deliver. She walked to the window. A black car was parked on the street below. Same make, same model, different angle. Her stomach dropped. She sat on the edge of the bed, eyes on the duffel. What was she holding? Not clothes, not documents, something else. A whisper from the past floated up. They never ended Widowmaker. Just buried it in the wrong hands. What if this bag was what they buried? 07:14 a.m., CIA listening post, Northern Italy. Geneva node just pinged. The man in the tactical chair didn't move. Trace it. Already on it. Unscheduled movement out of Le Shen Clinic. Someone extracted the target before autopsy. A nurse left with a bag. What bag? We're working on it. Tagging local CCTV now. The man's brow furrowed. He pressed a button. Put Widowmaker on standby. Jafari's remains are missing. And the files? The analyst paused. Unknown. Back in Geneva, 09:27 a.m. Amira stood barefoot in the hallway, staring down at the bag for the third time in 20 minutes. Her hands trembled now, not with fear, with memory. War had taught her that silence could mean anything. A silent village meant survivors hiding, or none at all. A silent room meant peace or ambush. A silent bag, it meant waiting. Waiting for the person brave, or foolish, enough to unzip it. She knelt beside it, paused, then stood again. This wasn't the moment. Not yet. The storm outside had broken again, thunder rolling across the lake like artillery in slow motion. She poured another cup of tea, sat on the bed, and told herself that she still had time.